Solitated Hedem. This is Magister Hodges. This is part 2 of the week 2 verb review. We're picking up right where part 1 left off. You can find the links to these videos in its learning. You can also find them on the first page of this of these slides. You can find the links to both these videos. So if you haven't watched part 1 yet, I would highly suggest it. You're kind of coming in the middle here. So let's pick up where we left off. We talked about present and imperfect tense verbs, what they mean, what the different endings are. And so now let's look at them in action in some different sentences. These are imperfect sentences with imperfect verbs. So I've color-coded it to where the subject and the verb are in red. Accusative nouns, the direct objects are in blue. Everything else just going to be in regular black font. So I'm going to start with this sentence right here. Ego fabulum optimum in foro spectabam. I was watching an excellent play in the forum. So as we said earlier on the in the present tense examples, ego here is not necessary because spectabam, since this ends with a BAM, and if you're looking at your imperfect tense verb sheet, you're going to see that if I am the subject, then the verb will end with bam in the imperfect tense. So that's all it tells you. That makes this ego unnecessary, but I put it here anyway because sometimes you would still see it. Same thing with here, with tu. So, tu turbam e willa audiebas. You weren't hearing the crowd outside the house. Ooh, I made a mistake. Let's fix it right now, live. Okay. Hopefully you caught the mistake as well. And if you didn't, you're about to see it. So I said audiebas, and I translated as you were not hearing. So the word I'm going to add here is non. Non audiebas means you were not hearing. All right. So, my bad. Stultus. Ooh, is my video frozen? It's not. Great. Okay. So you'll see here with the spectabam instead of specto. Specto would be I watch or I am watching. It's happening now. But since it's spectabam has the BA, ba, the imperfect sheep, it's going to be I was watching. Instead of audis, you are not hearing. You have non audiebas. You have the BA, makes it was or were, and it ends with the S, so it's not, you weren't hearing. Turbam, the crowd, ewila, outside the house. And then lastly, we have down here, Marius canes eratos vituperabat. Marius was cursing the angry dogs. Marius is the name, and so that's a he, she, or it. It's a singular thing. So it'll end with, this verb will end with bat, to agree with Marius. And vituperat means curses, so vituperabat means was cursing. Canes eratos, the angry dogs, the accusative plurals right there, because they're being cursed. Some more examples right here. Nos multam pecuniam habebamus, sed vos semper id capiabatis. We used to have multam pecuniam, a lot of money, said, but y'all were always taking it. Vos capiabates semper id. Y'all were taking always it. So here you'll see that I used an alternative translation for habebamus. I said we used to have a lot of money because instead of saying we used to have a lot of money, I could have said we were having a lot of money, but that just sounds weird. And that's the general reason why we use those alternative translations. They're all technically correct all the time. The default translation that if you want to just stick to one, I would say stick to the was or were blanking translation, because that's usually going to be the right one. And then our last, and you'll see here, since the subject is wos for y'all, this will end with batis, with the TIS ending right there, meaning y'all are doing it. Over here, when the subject is nos or we, you'll notice the verb ends with bamus. Juvenes in urbe ambulare amabant. So I had here, the young men were loving to walk in the city, but that sounds weird, right? The young men used to love to walk in the city. That sounds a little better. We could also say the young men kept on loving to walk in the city, which is just strange. So that's not what I chose. I liked used to walk, and it just sounded better. So that's why I used that. All right. Our last little hurdle here is, after having talked about the present and imperfect tense, let's talk about one of our most important irregular verbs. Irregular meaning it does not follow the same pattern as OST, mustis unt, for its first, second, third singular and plural endings in either tense. It just kind of does its own thing. Very similar in English to how we say I am, you are, he is. It's just different, but they're the same word. How do we know what to use? We just know what sounds right. To the Romans, this just sounded right. And there's really no other reason other than that. So this is the word here is sum esse fui futurus, and we're going to explain these four principal parts for everything in a minute. This word is just all different versions of to be. So let's look at it in the present tense. The first person singular is sum, meaning I am. Second singular is es, for you are. Third singular is est, he, she, or it, or a name, is. Sumus, we are. Estis, y'all are. Sunt, they are. And that's the first, second, and third plural. Now, that's what it looks like in the present tense. You'll notice you still see the st, mus, tis, nt endings. You still see an m here, which is a little different from the o. So it follows a general pattern, but some come from sum and some come from like est. And it's just, when it comes to irregulars, the only way to know it is to just memorize it. Then we get to move over to the imperfect tense. Now, with all the other imperfect tense verbs, we've seen BA to tell us it's imperfect, but here you will see a lack of BA. You'll see eram, era, serat, eramus, erati, serant. I was, you were, he was, we were, y'all were, they were. So this one's a little more regular. Starts with ERA all the time, and then you just slap the endings onto it. ST, must, sunt. You still got that M there. So that one's a little easier to understand. Just the main difference, you'll see either est or erat a lot of the time. Just remember that est means is, erat means was. These will be the two most common words you see from here. Or sunt means are, and erant means they were. All the other ones we don't see quite as much because most things are written in the third person, but that's the general scheme there. Like I said, the only way to memorize this, or the only way to know this, is to just memorize it, to study it, to practice it. So let's talk about the four principal parts of a verb. Last week, we talked about the two principal parts that you're given in a noun. So remember that principal parts are the forms that are given to you in a dictionary entry. And the reason that you're given them is because based off just one of those words, you have no way of knowing for sure what the word will look like when it takes different forms. The four principal parts show you the different ways the word can change. And based off those four principal parts, no matter the tense, no matter what you're trying to say, you can use those four principal parts to figure out any form of a verb. We're only focusing on the first two principal parts, and we're only going to focus on the present and imperfect, which are relatively simple. As we move to different verb tenses and uses of verbs down the road, we're going to use all four of those principal parts for different things. And so that's why this is important. Principal part, and like I said, I kind of just explained this right here. Principal parts are important for a language learner because without them, there's no real reliable way to know what different forms of a verb look like. You can guess, but we want more certainty than guessing. And you may be thinking this is weird, but consider that in English is English has principal parts as well, but you've probably never seen them or had them explained to you that way because you've never had to learn. Well, for those of you who've learned English as a second language, you may be familiar with the principal parts of English words or of English verbs. English verbs typically have three principal parts, and here's some examples down here. You get the present tense, the past tense, and then what we call the past participle, which don't worry too much about what that means. The long and short of it is a verb being used as an adjective to describe something. So for the word break, to break, I can say I break, but when it's past tense, I say I broke. How would you know that? You wouldn't. It's irregular. That's why these principal parts are important. And then if I want to say like I see the broken picture or I have broken the picture, you'll see that there. Compare that to sing, sang, sung. Right? I sing, I sang, the song, the sung song sounded good. Ooh, it's got a little sibilance on there, a little alliteration. Then we got see, saw, seen, which is fun to say. I see, I saw, the man has been seen. Okay, so there's no way to know. That's why the principal parts are important. And that's why when you study a verb, it's important to not just study what it looks like, the first principal part, but all principal parts. More principal parts will become more important as we move on, and you'll learn more about the other ones next week. So let's look at what these four principal parts look like in Latin. So Here are two examples of a dictionary entry that you would see for the verb to greet and to see. The first saluto, salutare, salutavi, salutatus. All of these mean generally to greet. Down here we have the word for to see. Video, videre, vidi, visum. So we're only going to worry today about the first two, but I'm going to go through what all of these mean. The first principal part of a verb is just what it looks like when it's first person singular in the present tense. So it's going to be I blank. Saluto, I greet. Video, I see. Salutare, this is the infinitive form. This is the new one that for a lot of my old students that we're kind of now seeing for the roughly first time and knowing what it is. You'll see this one always ends with re, salutare and videre. Now, I may want to go back. As we get into more complex, there are different classes of verbs that may not end with re when they're infinitive, but we're not going to worry about that for now. Okay? Salutavi and vidi. These are the first person singular perfect tense, and we're not talking about the perfect tense this week. That'll be next week. But basically, salutavi means I greeted, whereas vidi means I saw. And that third principal part is always going to be the perfect tense form of the verb. And then lastly, we have salutatus and visum. These are called the perfect passive participle. Similar to the English principal parts we were just talking about, this is when we're using the verb as an adjective to describe something, like the greeted man or the seen boy. Now, we're going to get to that a good bit later. This is used in various different forms of Latin verbs. It's also used on their own. You've actually seen a couple of these without knowing it, so I'm not going to focus too much on that right now. Let's talk about these first two principal parts, the first singular present and the infinitive. So, what's important about these first two is, one, from these you can form all the present tenses and all the imperfect tenses of a verb. Another thing, similar to nouns, verbs belong to families that we call conjugations. Knowing a verb's conjugation is not as important as knowing a verb's declension. But there are important moments where you do need to know the conjugation of a verb in order to form it properly. We're not going to go way too in depth on this right now, why it's important. I just want you to learn how to identify the conjugation of a verb. It's just like nouns, you look at the first two principal parts, the first and the second, saluto, salutare, video, videre. Let's look how this works. So we're only going to learn how to identify the first and second conjugation verbs. In all, there are 4.5 conjugations, and we're going to work on identifying the first two. Check out these two columns right here. You've got first conjugation verbs here, second conjugation verbs here. Look at the first two principal parts of each of these words, and you may start to notice a pattern. First conjugation verbs typically have are as their second principal part ending, and the first part typically ends with just an o. Whereas with the second conjugation, you'll notice all their first principal parts end with eo, and all their second principal parts end with ere. Now, you may say, oh, well, if it's are, then it's first, and if it's ere, it's second. Well, next week we'll explain why you want to be cognizant of both. But for right now, that is simple enough. That will get you where you need to go. Just saying, ere is second, are is first. But let me warn you, in the future, it gets a little more complicated. So that's the basic rundown of the review. This is just a reminder of the things that we were trying to understand and learn this week. So just check this, pause this, go down the list, and ask yourself if you can do these things. Okay, and if you can't, you know where to go to find them, and you're welcome to rewatch this video a million times. Also, smash that subscribe button. Just kidding. All right. Lastly, if my explanation was confusing or you felt incomplete, I would like to refer you to the Latin Tutorial YouTube channel. It's one of the best out there, and if you're someone who wants to get ahead and you feel I'm going too slow, highly suggest this channel. Here is Magister Johnson's video over the present tense, the imperfect tense, and what the heck these principal parts and verb conjugations mean. After this, I will be posting a verb practice and then a week 2 verb review quiz, similar to last week where the practice you have unlimited attempts. That's ungraded, but it's practice. The quiz itself is 1 attempt and it is graded, and that will be our next formative grade. Outside of that, that's all I got. Multa amore omnibus valete.